Hi everybody! We're going to review some of the sentences from quizzes 3 and 4, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So the first one here is the weather in Cozumel was beautiful, the sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. Now, as many of you remember before, we discussed independent clauses, and you have two independent clauses here. The weather in Cozumel was beautiful, that's one independent clause, I'm going to make that one red. And the sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. That's another independent clause. I'm going to make that one blue. The problem is we're using a comma to separate these two independent clauses. And from my lessons earlier, you know that a comma isn't strong enough to separate two independent clauses. So we need to do something else here. We could use a semicolon. The weather in Cozumel was beautiful. The sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. Or we could use a period and capitalize the. And again, that solves the problem. The weather in Cozumel was beautiful, period. The sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. You could also use a coordinating conjunction. The weather in Cozumel was beautiful, and the sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. Or, and there are a number of other ways to actually change the sentence and add words to make it grammatically correct. But just by changing the punctuation, you could either do a semicolon or a period. Now, I noticed that a few people were putting a comma here. The sun drenched the beaches and made snorkeling delightful. We're putting a comma here. You don't need that. This is and made snorkeling delightful. Made snorkeling delightful. That's not an independent clause. It can't stand alone as a sentence. It's just in this case, so you do not need to use a comma there. The only punctuation that's needed in this sentence is between the two independent clauses, and you have the choice of the period or the semicolon there. All right. In this one, in a boat on the lake under the stars, I had my first kiss with my boyfriend. This is actually correct. This was one of the multiple choice questions. And some of the answers were in a boat, comma, on the lake, comma, under the stars, I had my first kiss with my boyfriend. Well, in this case, you don't do that. If you remember from your reading that after an introductory element, you do want to put a comma, but if you have like 3 prepositional phrases like this, you put the comma after all of them. So in a boat, on a lake, and under the stars, those are all 3 prepositional phrases. They're all in one big introductory element, and you put the comma after all of them instead of after each one. So whenever you have multiple prepositional phrases together to make an introductory element, the comma goes after all of them. Okay, in this one, Mr. Smith, who is a very tall man, will be spending the day with us, and I believe he is ready to go. Okay, so here you have Mr. Smith is the subject of the sentence. So, and this is punctuated correctly at this in this example here. Mr. Smith is the subject of the sentence, so I'm going to make him red. Who is a very tall man? This is a non-restrictive clause because, I'm going to make it yellow. It's a non-restrictive clause. Who is a very tall man? It's helpful for us to understand more about Mr. Smith, but it's not required for us to understand the meaning of the sentence. So you could take that out. Mr. Smith will be spending the day with us. That makes complete sense. So because it is a non-restrictive clause, we're setting that apart with commas. So Mr. Smith, comma, who is a very tall man, comma, will be spending the day with us, and I believe he's ready to go. Okay, we put the comma here between the comma before the and because I believe he's ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and make that teal. That is an independent clause. So we're going to separate that from the other independent clause. Mr. Smith will be spending the day with us with a coordinating conjunction and a comma. So remember the fanboys thing that I talked about in class. You have a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and that can separate 2 independent clauses. So in this case, that's why we need to put the comma here. Now, some people were putting commas around I believe. And that doesn't make sense in this case because I believe is not an interrupter in this case. I believe he is ready to go. That in this case, the believing is actually the verb. It's not, I believe is not interrupting the sentence. That's actually the action. The subject of this clause is I, and I is believing. Okay, so in this case, I believe is not an interrupter, so we don't need the commas around I believe. Now, if you were to say something like this, Mr. Smith, I believe, is ready to go, notice how here I'm putting the commas. I'm going to make that, oops, that doesn't look very good. I'm going to make this highlighted. I hope I hit the right button. There we go. In blue. So Mr. Smith, I believe, is ready to go. Look at this, how this is. Mr. Smith is ready to go. If you take out that I believe, it's perfectly understandable. In this case, I believe is interrupting the sentence. And Mr. Smith is the subject and is the verb. So I believe is interrupting, and we're going to set that apart with commas. But notice how this is different. I believe he is ready to go. I is the subject of the sentence, and believe is the verb. So in this case, I believe is not interrupting the sentence. We don't set it off with commas. So in Mr. Smith, who is a very tall man, is the non-restrictive clause. That's set off by commas, and we need a comma before the and because it's connecting two coordinating conjunctions. It's a coordinating conjunction connecting two independent clauses. All right, so this is another example of that. Yes, I believe the white car, on the other hand, is a newer version of the blue one, but I can see that both cars, I believe, are worth the cost. Now, if you were actually writing this, I would say revise that. Sentence is very long and confusing, but right now we're working on learning how to punctuate it, not how to revise it. So, in this case, yes is the introductory element, so we have the comma after yes here. I'm going to go ahead and make that yellow. Yes, comma, because it's an introductory word. I believe the white car. Now again, we're using I believe in the same way where I is the subject and believe is the verb. So I believe is not an interrupter. I believe the white car, on the other hand. On the other hand here is an interrupting phrase. So I'm going to make that orange. On the other hand is a newer version of the blue one. So notice you can take that out. I believe the white car is a newer version of the blue one. Makes perfect sense. So we know that on the other hand is a non-restrictive clause. It's interrupting the sentence. So we're going to set that off by commas. Okay, so yes, comma, I believe the white car, comma, on the other hand, comma, is a newer version of the blue one. But I can see that both cars, I believe, are well worth the cost. So but needs a comma here because that's a coordinating conjunction. And again, it's we've got a coordinating conjunction separating two independent clauses. I believe the white car is a newer version of the blue one. I can see that both cars are well worth the cost. Both of those can stand alone on sentences. Even with their interrupters, they can stand alone as sentences. But I'm taking out the interrupting clauses just to make it simpler for you to understand and to reinforce the fact that we're setting things off with commas when they're interrupting the sentence, when they're non-restrictive and not essential to understand the meaning of the sentence. So we need a comma here before but. But is a coordinating conjunction and it is connecting these two independent clauses. So we need the comma there. Then I can see both cars, I believe, are well worth the cost. I'm going to highlight this in the same color as on the other hand. Because just like on the other hand, here, I believe, is a non-restrictive clause. It's interrupting. So I can see that both cars, comma, I believe, are well worth the cost. I can see that both cars are well worth the cost. In this case, I believe is not necessary to understanding the sentence. It's not, it's interrupting the sentence. It's a non-restrictive clause, so it gets set off with commas as well. Okay, so notice the difference between I believe as the verb and then I believe as an interrupting or non-restrictive clause. All right. So the girl who is in the back of the classroom has a bad cold, but she is trying, I believe, to get well for the play scheduled for January 2010. This is punctuated correctly. Let's talk about a few things that students were doing wrong on the quiz. I saw this. The girl who was in the back of the classroom. Now, this is not a non-restrictive clause. This is a restrictive clause because we need to know which girl. Not just the girl who is in the back of the classroom has a bad cold. No, we have to know it's that specific girl, the girl in the back of the classroom. If we take out the back of the classroom and just say the girl has a bad cold, I don't understand the meaning of the sentence. Which girl, right? So we have to take out commas there. We don't include commas here because we have to know which girl. So this is a restrictive clause. The girl who is in the back of the classroom has a bad cold. And then comma, because we have a coordinating conjunction here, with separating two independent clauses again, but she is trying, I believe. We have a non-restrictive clause there. We have an interrupting expression. But she is trying, I believe, to get well for the play scheduled for January 2010. I saw some people doing this, and I saw some people doing this. That's not correct in either sense. January 2010 can fit right into the sentence there. You don't need to include a comma in that case. So this is correct, and now you see the difference between a restrictive clause and a non-restrictive clause with who is in the back of the classroom and I believe. All right, so now we're getting into quiz 4. Resumes in the United States should not include personal information. However, resumes for positions in Great Britain usually do include information such as marital status and nationality. So the only thing you needed to do with this in the quiz is this. Okay, resumes in the United States should not include personal information. Independent clause. Resumes for positions in Great Britain usually do information that include information such as marital status and nationality. Independent clause. We're joining these not with a coordinating conjunction, but we're joining these with a with however. And in this case, with conjunctive adverb. And in this case, remember the rule is that we're going to use the semicolon and then the comma after however. And remember how I explained that makes sense because resumes in the United States should not include personal information is an independent clause. Resumes for positions in Great Britain, blah, 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 is an independent clause. So it makes sense that we can't just use a comma to separate them. And we need to use the semicolon and then the comma after however, because however is that it's a conjunctive adverb, but it's like an introduction or a transition into this second clause here. Okay, that's the only change that needs to be made here. Some people were putting a comma before such as marital status and nationality. Again, we need to think about what's restrictive and what's a non-restrictive clause. In this case, Britain usually do include information. Okay, just information is not enough. I don't understand what we mean. All resumes include information. What kind of information? Such as marital status and nationality. Okay, we need to know that. If we just have the comma here, that suggests this clause is non-restrictive. That's not true. We need to know what kind of information. So there's no comma that's needed there. All right. Women have fewer color and style restrictions than do men, though they should maintain a professional conservative image. So there were two corrections that need to be made here. Women have fewer color and if I can talk. Women have fewer color and style restrictions than do men, comma, though they should maintain a professional, comma, conservative image. Okay, in here we have a comma before though, not a semicolon. Though is not a conjunctive adverb. Though is a it's a subordinating conjunction. Though they should maintain a professional conservative image is a subordinate clause. So it's not a conjunctive adverb. We put the comma here instead of a semicolon. Also, we need we have two adjectives, both modifying image. So in this case, we need to include oops, that's that awful color again. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do this. We need to include the comma between both of them. Professional, comma, conservative image, because both professional and conservative are modifying image. All right, and then the final one, in Malaysia, a high context culture, these forms of nonverbal communication are important. Tone of voice, body language, and facial expression. In this case, we have 3 corrections that needed to be made from the quiz. In Malaysia, a high context culture. That, again, is a non-restrictive clause. In Malaysia, these forms of nonverbal communication are important. We still understand that sentence. So we're going to set that off with commas. We also need to use a hyphen between high and context. High context needs a hyphen between it. And then the final thing here is these forms of nonverbal communication are important. Tone of voice, body language, and facial expression. Because here we have a series following some kind of form of are these. And when we have a series following some kind of form of are these, we use a semicolon. So hopefully that clears up some of the confusion surrounding some of those sentences from quizzes 3 and 4. I do realize that that there are that it can be harder to do this stuff in, when you're actually making corrections than when you're just reading about the rules and having to choose the right answer. So hopefully by going over these, and watch this video as many times as you need, you'll have a better understanding of how to do this when you're actually writing. All right, guys, thanks so